I think those are high hurdles for the Iranians to get to. But at some point in time, their country will continue to get devastated and will need to come to the table. And look, I know something important to your viewers. We've yet to see a heavy impact on the Iranian economy, particularly the energy sector. And, if Israel moves to that first, attacking in large measure sites such as Karg Island, that could have a dramatic input on energy production, on the global economy. And so there are all these incentives for there to be some type of negotiation. The question is, given the regime, its head, its popularity, or I should say unpopularity with the Iranian people, what's it going to take to get them there?
Let's break some of this down. Here's the latest that you've got to understand on Israel. Yesterday, we heard Donald Trump tell us that, look, we're going to wait 2 weeks. This is a form of taco, okay? Trump always chickens out. Now, is that necessarily a bad thing? No. In fact, in the Meet Kevin Alpha report, we said best case scenario is that we would get some form of negotiated solution before strikes. Very critical. Ideally, and best case scenario, negotiated solution before strikes. Simply put. Let's get some of the latest, though. So, when we look at what else is going on, we're still having this exchange of, ballistic missiles as well as airstrikes, so essentially strikes, between the two. The United States is trying to sanction Iran more, but something that is important to remember is the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran, did lead Iran to join in on agreements to limit in the enrichment of uranium. They are now offering to limit the enrichment of uranium again. This is supposedly the talk that's going on in Geneva right now to have peace talks with Iran and the international community. Now, what is interesting about the enrichment of uranium? So I want you to think about this for a moment. When you utilize U-238 in peaceful programs, such as in the Iraq heavy water nuclear facility. Remember that one that just got attacked over the weekend? There's the Iraq heavy water reactor that's used primarily for, research purposes or whatever. That facility was just bombed by the Israelis. And a lot of people are saying, oh my gosh, this could lead to, fallout or larger issues. But it actually should, for you, paint a bigger issue, not so much one of fallout, but one that helps you understand why even peaceful use of a nuclear reactor could end up leading to Iran having a weapon. So here's that reactor that was directly bombed. You could see that here. Israel, by the way, also released a footage. I'll pull it up in just a moment here. Israel released footage of the facility being bombed. But what's important is understanding what happens when you have a peaceful uranium energy program and how that can still help you get a bomb. So this is a little tricky. I'll explain it right after I show this little footage here because it's really cool. So look at this. This is the video right here. And we'll play it from the beginning here. There's the reactor. There it is. Inactive. They say inactive. Some people say it was still, active for research purposes or whatever. And here you can see the footage of the direct strike, which is kind of remarkable. So some of the footage that you can see out there is just insane. Just actual war footage of this happening. But here's why it matters, okay? We're going to take out some really heavy technology here. We're going to take this piece of paper and I'm going to explain something. And you should take a screenshot of this and understand this when it comes to Iran. Okay? So, when you have uranium-238, you basically just have ore. Okay? So most of uranium, most of its mass weight is basically uranium-238. That's pretty much what you find in ore. Okay, there are a few things you could do with uranium-238. You can use it in peaceful energy programs, and you could use it with a little smidgen, like 3 to 5% of U-235, to create a peaceful energy program. Okay, great. When you create or use, let's call it 97% U-238, and let's call it 3% of U-235, which is your weapons grade enriched uranium. When you use these in an energy reactor for peaceful purposes, you end up creating plutonium. I want to say it's P239, if I have that correct, kind of like the handgun. Plutonium, yeah, it is. Plutonium 239, okay? Plutonium-239 is one of the byproducts. It's basically when 238 gains a neutron and becomes plutonium-239. The irony of this is that you can start with this peaceful initiative, that this is just a peaceful energy reactor program, but the byproduct of this peaceful reactor program is plutonium-239, which guess what you could do with plutonium-239? You can create the bomb. Okay? The other option is you could just go with enriching, or we call it centrifuging, 238, and you try to separate out a lot of the 235. You do this in a centrifugal process, and I always get this backwards, but I believe that the heavier stuff goes to the outside, so the 238, and then the U-35, the lighter stuff, goes to the bottom, I believe, because basically this is a big spinning centrifuge. And the 238 goes to the outside, and then in the gaseous state, the 235 goes to the bottom, and you could separate it through, valves or suction valves or, gas valves or whatever, right? Okay, so then what can you do with U-235? Well, you could either say, oh, don't worry, the 235 is just for peaceful purposes, or you could create the bomb. Okay? This is like a very oversimplified explanation here, but this is why people are worried about Iran doing any kind of enriching at all. Because if you consider that, oh, we're just going to have a peaceful program. Well, in order to have a peaceful program, you still need weapons-grade uranium to begin the 238 reaction. And if you have this nuclear reactor going, you create plutonium-239, which could be used in a bomb. Okay? But in order to have this peaceful reaction, you have to have U-235 centrifuged out of the 238 ore. But when you do that, what do you end up with? Well, you end up with a lot of U-235, which could also be then put into those energy reactors or a bomb. So either way, okay, no matter how you have an enrichment program, no matter what you do, whether it's peaceful or not, you're going to end up with components that are possible for a bomb, okay? Peaceful, so you have the peaceful one creates peaceful plutonium for a bomb. You have the non-peaceful one, you create the components for a bomb. So this is why all of these negotiations around Iran stopping their enrichment of uranium completely is probably best case scenario. So I would say best case scenario, Iran does zero enrichment. They entirely give up enrichment. The next best case scenario is Iran says, okay, we'll agree to inspections and we'll agree to some kind of massive limitations on what we can do. The way you limit that is you basically monitor how much 235 they create, that it's just enough for the peaceful purposes, and then you monitor what they do with bomb equipment. Not only do you monitor where the heavily enriched uranium is, the 235, and other, and again, I'm way oversimplifying here, but you also monitor where that plutonium goes, right? That is an option. It's less ideal than people just ending the enrichment program. That is exactly why the United States is open to potentially attacking the Fordo nuclear facility, because people are sick and tired of every time for the last 30 years Iran goes back to enriching, they end up with enough crap to make a bomb. Because again, even in the peaceful process, you get material to make a bomb. So it kind of is logical when people say, oh, Israel has enough material to make a bomb. Yeah, because even through the peaceful process, you end up getting bomb byproducts, which is kind of wild to think of. But anyway, so we do have Geneva talks beginning for peace talks. This combining with Donald Trump's sort of weak TBD if we're going to strike or whatever will lead to calming of tensions in this region, at least globally. You still have the potential for strikes, vice versa, basically each side striking each other. But broadly and for the longer term, these discussions around enrichment are the most important. Now, my point of view is what everybody really wants to pay attention to is not only the loss of life, but ultimately, and limiting that, and hopefully seeing strikes maybe move towards more, less population-centric targets. That would be nice. However, the big issue that you have right now is that 3 hours ago we got an update from Iran that, quote, zero enrichment will, quote, undoubtedly be rejected. And this is where you kind of have this question of, like this, interviewer on CNBC was saying, okay, is Iran publicly saying that they won't go for zero enrichment? Or are they publicly saying that and then quietly saying, we're open to zero enrichment, if we get some other opportunities? Okay, what other opportunities could there be? Well, the other things that matter to Iran are oil exports. In fact, Iran is skyrocketing their oil exports right now to try to get as much oil as they can out into the public markets, because they realize that they are an easy target for Israel to strike. In fact, if you look at, I've got some pictures here. Hold on, let me grab those really quickly. All right, so we've got some photos of tank reserves that Iran has, and they're pumping them up to not only get them out of areas where they are at risk of being attacked, but they're also being pumped up to get them onto ships as soon as possible so they could make as much money as they possibly can. So the first picture I want you to see is this one on oil tanks. And this is a little interesting to keep in mind, or how this works. Oil tanks have a floating lid to prevent vapors from separating from the oil. And so you have these floating lids on these giant oil canisters, oil wells or whatever you want to call them. And so the lid moves up with the level of oil. And so you can see how low the lid levels are based on the shadow on these various different oil wells here. And this was a photo from before the strikes, so June 11th. And if you jump in over here, you can see by June 18th, the oil wells are substantially more full as you're preparing to pump them out into a saleable environment. Another thing that you're finding is that ships that used to dock around the Karg Island oil terminal basically now are away from the terminal, but what they're doing is they're coming in, grabbing oil, leaving, coming in, grabbing oil, leaving. Like they're sort of rapidly relay racing in and out. And the suggestion of this from oil professionals is that Iran is secretly trying to get as much oil as they possibly can out for two reasons. One, because of geopolitical issues, oil prices go up, which means they get more profit per barrel. So, in a weird way, the more the conflict goes on, the higher oil prices go, the more Iran makes in terms of money, and the more they can keep funding their war. There is now also talk that cargo aircraft are potentially, and this is talk, could be a rumor, but that cargo aircraft are leaving Russia and coming to Iran with resupplies of weapons. Okay, there is now a comment I just see here. This is, okay, yeah, no, that's older, that's fine. And then there is talk here Yeah, okay. Of these cargo planes potentially coming from Russia with restocks of these hypersonic missiles or ballistic missiles. Iran, for example, just now launched 35 missiles, which is a step up from the sort of more 5 to 10 volleys we've been seeing recently. So you can see this is nowhere really near getting close to done, even though negotiations are going on. Since last Friday, Iran has now launched 520 missiles against Israel, which is quite a shocking level. Expectations were that they'd have about 2,000 in their arsenal, and Israel is expected to potentially only have another 7 days of defensive munitions, though I would anticipate that the United States would be willing to restock those very rapidly. So keeping an eye on that as well. So, in addition to these oil exports from Iran, there's at these higher prices, there's also talk that there could just be direct trade for more weapons and discounted oil to sneak past sanctions from Russia. Russia seems to be a lot more supportive right now than China. China is not providing a lot of support other than in the sort of verbal sphere, if you will, suggesting that China condemns these attacks against Iran's sovereignty, but really we're not getting a broader support from China. Additionally, Israel is potentially also considering striking Iran with a commando group in that Fordow enrichment facility itself, rather than also having to utilize the United States bunker-busting bombs. So this Israel has done before. For example, in Syria, Syria had a commando raid into to eliminate an Iranian bunker. This was back in September of last year. And they had 120 aircraft involved in striking around the area, providing air cover and superiority to their commandos, who could then come in and raid an underground bunker where Iran was believed to be enriching or storing enriched uranium, either creating enriched uranium or storing it, in addition to producing missiles, quote unquote, deep into the mountainside. Obviously, if you use commandos, you don't have to blow up the entire mountainside because you could just break through the doors and blast your way through, like Tanya planting C4. Now, the other option that Israel also has, obviously they could use a strategic nuclear weapon, which would be really bad because of the fallout considerations, but another option is literally just forget the 30,000-pound bunker-busting bomb. Just drop dozens and dozens of 2,000 to 4,000-pound bombs, which Biden did authorize, finally, the sale of those 2,000-pound bombs, or gift, whatever you want to call it, to Israel. And the reason I say that is because some things are gifted, some things are, heavily discounted, and other things are sold. A lot of it is just marketing to the American and Israeli population, so we don't always know exactly what's going on. So Israel has done these things, again, as recently as last September in Syria, where Israel has done these commando raids against these tunnels. Another concern that I have with the United States using a 30-pound bunker-busting bomb is, what if we miss? Then we're gonna be very embarrassed. We're gonna look like losers who have lost our military edge. And so there's a real concern of missing and failing. And if you miss and fail, well, then the United States looks like a clown, and it's not good. Now, I've been talking to folks like, how do we get the intelligence to actually know where to bomb? I've previously suggested we could have on-the-ground intelligence, which is highly likely what we would need. But another thing that is possible is that some of the intelligence that we have had through satellite imagery when these bunkers were originally built could be in our archives, so we know exactly where and how these underground bunkers were built while they were being built, maybe 20, 30 years ago or 15 years ago, whenever they were built. It's a fascinating potential idea for how we would actually have the precision to know where the exact centrifugal tunnels are to strike them. That said, there's also the broader concern that more countries are going to want, and this is the big issue, that if Iran is encouraged or allowed to have a nuclear bomb, that countries like Syria and Turkey would want to have a bomb as well, which is obviously undesirable because now we would have more countries proliferating a nuclear arsenal. China has already added 100 arsenals to its 100 warheads to its arsenal, and they've been doing so every single year, sort of just growing it by about 100 per year. Russia obviously has a very large nuclear arsenal. Israel has a large nuclear arsenal. And there's some concern that if Iran has a bomb, then Turkey's going to get on board, Syria's going to get on board. And we're really walking away from this 1968-style policy of nuclear non-proliferation and getting more towards proliferation, which again, seen as bad. So, where do we go from here? TBD. Trump says we can't let Iran have a nuclear bomb. That sounds good, but are we actually going to be able to achieve the prevention of that? That's critical. And strikes by the United States, those strikes, best case scenario. Some negotiated, very limited enrichment or no enrichment, much better case scenario. Hopefully we could be in that sort of direction. So that's my opinion on the nukes and where we stand with enrichment, why there's such problems with enrichment, and why this Israeli crisis and Iranian crisis is actually really complicated because there is no easy answer. And so while it's easy to argue that, Trump is tacoing on the strikes, Trump always chickens out, it also makes sense. Because potentially on the verge of embarrassing ourselves, and maybe there are better ways to get to zero enrichment. Especially since some think that if we struck Fordo, Iran would do whatever it could with its stored, highly enriched uranium to just rush a bomb. Why? This is the other people ask me. They're like, Kevin, why would they rush to make a bomb? Because look at North Korea. North Korea has nuclear weapons, and we don't attack them. We don't strike them. It's kind of the perfect way to have what's called nuclear deterrence. Basically, once you have a bomb, you could deter countries like Israel from attacking you, whereas Israel is attacking now because Iran does not yet have a bomb. Very interesting. So anyway, that said, there's obviously a lot that's involved when it comes to these nuclear talks. Hopefully this adds a lot of perspective to where your mindset is on what's going on with Israel and Iran.